Now that's impressive. I said, and by the way, Glenn Fitzgerald just put that together. It's going to go up on LinkedIn tomorrow about Edge 23. And Glenn's been going through a bit of an illness. And to do that and to do the things he's done, we just give him a round of applause because I'm glad you're getting better, Glenn. It's really terrific. I walked in about 20 minutes ago and we have this new CVent name tag system that Laura wanted and I thought made sense. And Mary Shea, who likes the written name tags that she manages, little 20th century, I said. And I walked in and Mike Dent says, just get out of my way, this isn't working, and I'm mad, and Maureen has me trying to fix it. And it got fixed as soon as I walked in, pretty good. It has to work in Las Vegas, though. But thank you all for being here. We did not know that reInvent was this week, so I know the number of GBF members. We do have our largest virtual audience today, and I think the program is, I'll talk about in a minute, but it's really going to be exceptional, and I think we are going to have the subject as part of a fireside chat in Las Vegas. But a little update on two things is, one is Edge at CES, and we're very proud, and all of us should be proud of what's happened. Number one, we had our team meeting on Monday, and on November 28th last year, we had 177 people registered, and by December 25th or 4th, we had 397. Now, we lost 70 because of Omicron, of course, but we still had one of our really good registration. This Monday, we had 283 people registered. Doesn't include about 20 or 30 speakers, all of whom are staying in count, 10 Carasoft people that we're still waiting on. So we've got fewer than 80 registrations before it's sold out. We will close registration with the hotel block on the 10th of December, but any GBF member that has not booked their hotel, our block is almost gone, which means we don't have to worry about meeting the attrition goal on our end. So, but rooms are not available the 4th and 5th. They are across the way at New York. They are available the 6th, 7th, and 8th. And the program's going to be phenomenal. We were on the phone with DHS. They called us about, many of you know this, the town hall with DHS that we had in 2020, right before COVID. It's kind of bad luck when we have that, but is coming back. It's going to be done a little differently. It's January 6th, just before the roundtables from 10 to 12. And they are bringing really good representation, and we already have good representation from DHS. So the new Undersecretary for Science and Technology, the Executive Director, Deputy Director for CISA, TSA, CBP, USCIS, OCIO are all going to be part of it, and then we're going to break the room as it stands now into 4 or 5 either missions or offices, and everyone can have the opportunity to walk around and talk to them because they've told us that they really want to talk about emerging technologies that they need and have interaction with our attendees. So we're really grateful to the department for that. And for the plenary session, there are going to be some really fantastic participation too. We were on the phone with General John Olson, who is the first Chief Data and Artificial Intelligence Officer for the Air Force. And that guy's dynamic. And he's planning on not just a presentation, but participation throughout the conference, which is one of the things I think that makes Edge of interest to all of us. People speak and they stay, and he's looking forward to it. And I told him he should stay Saturday night because a band, I said, I don't know if you know Jeffrey Skunk Baxter, and he goes, Skunk, are you kidding me? He's a friend of mine for like 10 years. So he's going to be with us throughout the conference, and we have a few major ones we're waiting on. But it's going to be special at a special time, I think, for our industry and for our country and for the world. So I know most of you are going to be there. We also are sending out membership renewals that you'll be getting from Laura sometime this week. And we are expanding the executive committee membership next year from 60 to 70. And we have a long list of people that want on them. And for that, we're grateful and humbled. But we remember the people who are here and have been here for many years, many of you. So we appreciate your participation. And our program chair is going to be here. Jeanette Lee is here, I saw. Our co-chair for Edge at CES. You and I have to talk. And Sanjay here? No? On his way? Okay. And Barry West is on his way. I know he was getting out of a board meeting. Let me tell you how we got to this subject. And it's going to be in the renewal letter. And I think you know this. When an organization, with an organization our size, I mean, people say, wow, you guys produce the best content. But I can look around this room, I'm not going to name all of you, the ideas that come together in our programming throughout the year are from our members, and the ideas about the speakers that come from our members. And so you'll see the plans that we have for 2023, but a lot of what happens in Las Vegas and in San Diego now come from our members. Woody Talcove is someone I've known for 20 plus years, and we were at a dinner once and he was telling me about how expensive healthcare fraud is. And I said, I think I'm sure it's there, but I don't think it's $250 billion a year. He said, no, it's actually a little more than that. And I said, bullshit, we're not going to buy it, but it is. And when we looked at it, he suggested the program you're going to see, we worked with him on, and the speakers we have been doing this one for 25 years. And I had the privilege of talking to all three of the speakers. I don't think there's a place where savings can be recorded in government more than technology in reducing fraud. I don't think there's a place where technology isn't deliberately used more than in this space. So this is going to be provocative. You'll see something, kind of a discussion will go into Las Vegas, but it's analytics, it's artificial intelligence, it's law enforcement. And with that, I want to thank our guests. Woody, obviously, thank you. Mark, Carrie, coming in from Richmond. I'm not even going to say where your travel schedule is. You just told me, but anyway, let's roll it.
Program fraud costs in the United States are staggering and represent a major waste of taxpayer dollars. The National Healthcare Anti-Fraud Association and the Government Accountability Office estimate annual healthcare program fraud to exceed $230 billion. That is enough money to provide each of the more than 580,000 homeless in the United States a home valued at $250,000 plus an additional cash payment of $146,000. Medicare fraud alone is estimated at about $1 billion per week, or more than $50 billion annually. Public assistance or welfare fraud is estimated to exceed $160 billion annually. A September 22 Washington Post article referencing a government watchdog agency estimated pandemic unemployment fraud at more than $45 billion. Advanced real-time identity management technologies, artificial intelligence-driven data analysis capabilities, state-of-the-art computing and communications technologies are effective tools to combat fraud. How are these utilized, and what are the challenges inhibiting their use? EDGESeries 22, Technology and Reducing the High Cost of Program Fraud, explores the problem and the potential to solve it. The Government Business Executive Forum is pleased to welcome for this program a 25-year law enforcement professional and current Special Investigations Unit Supervisor for the Department of Agriculture. Dr. Mark Haskins leads a nationwide team to combat fraud in the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance or food stamp program. His criminal justice experience and education are broad and extensive. In addition to his current responsibilities, Dr. Haskins is globally recognized for his work in fighting the opioid crisis and drug abuse. He is an author, professor, consultant, and passionate professional. Please welcome Dr. Mark Haskins.
Thank you for being here.
The bright lights. First of all, I wanted to thank Don for inviting me here. I'm new to this organization and this group, and it's a pleasure to come here. Before I start, I just want to open with my disclaimer that any of my comments here today, my personal opinions are just that, not of the federal government, the USDA, the White House, or any other political organization. There. So I've had the opportunity throughout my career, which spans back, as Don was saying, more than 25 years, outside of traditional law enforcement. I started out getting into healthcare fraud first with the Attorney General's office in New York. Did a lot of white-collar crime. From there, I moved into more of Medicaid fraud in the state. Did a lot of work in durable medical equipment fraud. and then eventually into pharmaceutical fraud and diversion, and leading up to where I am now. One of the things that I've noticed over the years is the fact that, we have this concept in the private sector where we always try and break down the silos that everybody's working with for several reasons, because of the communication barriers that we have, but more so because of the conflict within an organization that can be caused by everybody working in their own silos. The one thing that we don't have that for some reason, in government work. Now, everybody here, for the most part, has a much more of an extensive technology background than I do. But the interesting thing is, throughout all the work that I've done in fraud, and like I said, there's been, probably very few areas that I haven't touched upon. One of the things that I've always been able to rely on is, I may not speak the language that a lot of people in technology do, but I can tell you what I'm looking for. And so when I worked for example, in pharmaceutical fraud, and this was back when the opioid crisis wasn't even known to be an opioid crisis yet, we did some work in the state of New York, and I would go to my computer people that we had in-house, and it was great because I'd pour through records and I'd say, I need to see this. Well, what do you want to see? Well, I want to see this. I need to know who's prescribing this. I want, well, okay, then I can get that data for you. And from there, okay, now you gave me all this data. Now show me where it is on this giant spreadsheet you just made me, because I can't even read that. But so through my time, I learned that, you can't function in a law enforcement, a regulatory field, without data, and data was extremely important. The problem today is most of the people that are doing these investigations, and a lot of the people in law enforcement, aren't data-driven people. And law enforcement has a tendency of, hiring people from within to fill these spots. They don't go outside and say, okay, let's say the New York City Police Department, we're hiring, data investigators who must have a computer science degree, to come and work in the department as, a law enforcement officer, not as a computer person. So what happens is we have these breakdowns, and you have people that know how to investigate, and you have people who know how to, draw data and how to extract the information that we need. Now, that's great. Everybody can figure out, okay, this is where we see fraud, and this is how we're going to investigate fraud. But these two sides don't come together. And it's rare that they come together, because, and I can tell you, from what I'm doing right now, in the federal government, I think that it's no different than the state government and the local governments. We all know what we want, but we don't talk to each other. And that's the hardest thing that there is today. We're trying to get people to come out and say, whether it's SNAP fraud, whether it's healthcare fraud, you know what you're looking at, and you say, well, I see a pattern of fraud. Okay, well, how are you going to investigate it? Have you ever investigated fraud? Have you ever gone down, out in the street, or interviewed people, or had somebody in an interview situation that was not your friendly meeting type person? No, you haven't. It's not your line of work. Okay, so now you have the police investigator or the state investigator, and they go out and, well, you did this, 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 and this. Well, how do they know that? Well, you told them. You just told them, but they can't articulate now to the prosecutor where they got this information from. So this breakdown is what I see as one of the biggest factors today that really puts a damper on how we handle fraud cases. And I'll give you a perfect example. So we had a case at one point, and I know what I needed here. I didn't know if we were capable of getting this data. And the prosecutor said to me, we need more than this. Okay. So I brought him all of this data, and I said, this is the way it was explained to me. All right, it looks good, but you're going to have to explain this. Go before the grand jury now, and I can't go before the grand jury and explain this. Somebody gave it to me. I'm not well-versed enough to do this. So we had to go back and get somebody, that in the technology group that actually ran all this data and gave it to me, and now teach them about going before a grand jury. This is what you're going to say. Now you've got to testify against this stuff. So, the two sides have to meet somewhere in between. You have to have people that are cross-trained, that are capable of doing both sides. You have to understand data, and the problem, like I said, with police departments is, a lot of guys, well, yeah, I want to go in the data unit. That sounds good. I mean, what's your background? Well, I play video games. I like computers. I mean, I'm well suited for that. And so we see that as a problem. The other thing that I wanted to discuss briefly was I see fraud, fraud prevention used all the time. We came out with a new fraud prevention, technology. And there was something I caught the other day, and I want to see if I can get it here real quick, because I think it's something that, when we talk about fraud prevention, somebody said, well, it detects fraud and identifies where fraud is occurring. Well, is that fraud prevention? Every time I see prevention, it's you've already detected it. You've already found the fraud. That's not prevention. That's detection. And anytime a dollar gets out the door, it's not coming back. I mean, you try and claw, and I've seen this all the time, and states are notorious for this. Well, we have cost avoidance of over $300 million. That's a fancy way of saying we got robbed $300 million last year. We identified it. We're never getting it back, but it's cost avoidance. I mean, so we're not really detecting fraud or preventing fraud. We're detecting it. So it's already leaving the door. And part of the problem, and this is another area where the two sides need to come together, is the technology end detects fraud. But so what do you do to detect that fraud? Data mine, run some algorithms. Yeah, we can see some anomalies here, and here. But if you ever talk to somebody in an investigative role or law enforcement or somebody on the street where you say, what are you seeing out there? What are the emerging trends? Anytime I'd go out in the street early on in my career, I don't want to know what somebody did today or they did yesterday. I want to know what they're thinking about doing tomorrow. Because anything that they did today or yesterday, like I said, that's money that's gone. You're never going to get it back. The recovery in fraud is not what what most of us read about in the papers. Well, in the press releases, the judge ordered him to pay back $3.2 million. Okay, you took away his job, his house, his car, his bank accounts. Does anybody think he's getting $3.2 million out of this guy? You're not. It sounds good, but so the focus has to be more on the prevention, and the only way you can prevent it is by thinking ahead. What are they going to do next? Back when I did pharmaceutical fraud, this was before we had a problem with prescription drugs. It was just starting to come out, and one of the things in New York, we had a robust prescription drug monitoring program. And the way it was set up was anywhere in New York State that anybody brought a prescription in for a controlled substance, there was a database. The day it was filled, what you got, the day's supply. So it was pretty easy to track who are the biggest prescribing doctors, who are the biggest users of oxycodone, of Ritalin, of Adderall. You could see where the trends were. So now I can see, all right, so who are the biggest prescribing doctors? Is that a problem? It could be. What are the biggest cities in the state where I see these drugs? Is that a problem? It could be. So you could deep dive into that a little bit more. Problem is, there was only one or two other states in the country that had this program. Nobody else did. The federal government never mandated these prescription drug monitoring programs. And as a result, we had the prescription drug crisis. And a lot of the drugs were going down to what I call the Wild West of fraud, and it still is today. And that's South Florida. And I live in South Florida. And I will tell you, I mean, since I've been doing any kind of fraud, healthcare fraud, pharmaceutical fraud, SNAP fraud, South Florida is the petri dish of fraud. It really is. They come up with it there, they cultivate it there, and then they ship it out every place else. But some of the first that I've seen in my career have originated down in South Florida. So we didn't have any of these prescription drug monitoring programs in the rest of the country, and as such, the prescription drug crisis exploded. So the last speech I gave, and I was telling somebody before this, was in Long Island, before 400 doctors and and pharmacists and medical professionals. And now the problem is out of hand. And there's still no prescription drug monitoring programs, no data-driven programs to identify this stuff. So the government acts, with the sledgehammer more times than not to kill that fly. And so their idea was, we're just going to shut this thing right down. And we're going to stop, the prescribing, this, overprescribing. Now we're going to start holding doctors and pharmaceutical companies responsible. And what they did was they forgot all about, data and just went into this ultra enforcement mode where they were going to make people pay. I said it was a problem and a mistake. And I said, if you do this, you're going to make this thing far worse than you ever thought about. Because when you cut off people that have drug problems, you cut off their supply of drugs, do they just stop using drugs? No. They go to another drug. And so I said, you do this, you're going to see a heroin problem in this country, the likes of which we've never seen before. And within 18 months, we had a heroin problem in this country that was huge. And then it opened a new avenue for Mexico and China and India to start importing the precursors for fentanyl, and here we are today. So a lot of this could have been avoided by using data back then. And that's where, I guess the crux of what I'm getting at here, no matter what fraud we talk about, it starts in data and enforcement. And until we break down that wall between the two, we're competing against each other. When you look at today, law enforcement cases, whether it's SNAP fraud, welfare fraud, Medicaid fraud, most people don't know anything about them. Local prosecutors, maybe never did a pharmacy case. I can tell you, local prosecutors, the vast majority of them have never even touched a SNAP fraud case on the retailer side. On the client side, sure, a lot of them have. So you don't see a lot of enforcement action on things that are these entitlement program and these government program fraud. Whether it's unemployment fraud, you hear a few of them here or there, but there's not a lot of it done. And part of the reason is police don't have the data. They don't have the data, and what data is available and they don't know how to use it. And government, I think, is partially to blame, whether it's local, state, federal, whatever, because the data is available, the information is available, but it's not available through government sources. And this is the last part of what I wanted to touch on is, and Woody has seen this more times than not, because I always say that the biggest problem with fraud today is the government's trying to fight fraud, 21st century fraud with 20th century weapons. And they're behind the eight ball, behind the curve, because we don't have a robust public-private cooperation set up. The information is there through many of the companies that you work for. We shouldn't have to try to push this on government agencies. Government agencies should be seeking this out, saying, hey, you're the smart people in the room. You're the ones that know how to generate this data. How do we reduce this? I can tell you the trends that we're seeing. Give me some prevention models. Give me some analytics. Tell me where I should be going next. And we're not doing that. And I wish, I'd like to be more optimistic. But I will tell you, there was a group, public policy group that put out that I read 2 days ago on SNAP fraud. And I'm reading through this thing, and I wanted to laugh. Because, for example, they said, things you can do to prevent SNAP fraud. Change your PIN number regularly. Okay. First of all, where are the people that are on SNAP going to read these instructions? Well, the states put out these PSAs, but what they don't tell you is, okay, I changed my PIN number 2 minutes before I walk into this Walmart. Is that going to do any good? Because the second I put my card in that machine, they got my new PIN number. It's only as good as to the next time you use your card. So it's not a preventive strategy, it's a feel-good strategy. And I was telling some people about this before. There are other things that can be done to prevent this. But, to tell somebody do this when it has no impact on what they're doing at all isn't going to solve the problem. And until we find a way to, and again, to merge both of these things together, the other thing they wanted to do is they said in this paper, which again, let's switch, because I don't know if anybody has seen, state EBT cards or anything. They're just magnetic stripe cards. No chips, no nothing. So they said, well, we're going to get the states to go to chip cards. Chip cards are being skimmed already. I mean, it's old technology. So what you want us to do is you want us to go to old technology. It's just not as old as the old technology we're using now. I mean, tap and pay, they're hacking into already. And by the time states go to tap and pay, that'll probably be obsolete. So why? Because nobody is thinking ahead. Everybody is focusing on today and on what happened yesterday. And, as I tell people who work for me, and I've said this for years, sometimes you have to think like the bad guy. You have to think like a criminal. What would a criminal do? How would they act? How would they steal your money? If you were going to steal their money, how would you do it? Criminals are, they're no different than anybody else. They just think outside the box. And we don't think like they do. They're not any smarter than anybody else in this room. In fact, they're probably not as smart as most people in this room. But until we start thinking like they do and focusing on the future and where we're going, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we're going to continue to play catch up. And that's all I have right now. Yes.
The one thing that I think people, because we'll move on, but one thing that impressed, when people think of food stamp fraud, they think of individual fraud, like you said. But when we talked on the phone, that isn't really where it's organized crime, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's very organized right now. We have, large groups of, multinational gangs that are coming into the country. Half the time we don't know who these people are. Anybody know what the biggest currency is right now in SNAP fraud? The number one currency in SNAP fraud right now? Red Bull. Red Bull. We have cases involving widespread purchases of pallets of Red Bull. 900 cases, 2,000 cases at a time, $25,000 a week worth, all was skimmed and stolen EBT cards. And there's a big market for that, because you think about the number of small stores and bodegas that there are in the country, and they can't buy this stuff cheap. And I think Woody was telling me, because I don't drink it, but it's like, what, $35 a case? So if it's $35 a case, maybe the small store can buy it for $30. But what if you could buy it for $10, and you got 24 cans, and you're selling it for $5 a can? It's big money. And one of the things, so Red Bull is a big currency right now. I've never seen an item bought and sold more frequently than Red Bull is. And for whatever reason, they're showing up with Ryder trucks when they pick this stuff up. And it's the number one thing right now, and it doesn't matter. Well, and my thing too is that really healthy, Woody?
When you're tired.
Yeah. So, but there are other things. As a matter of fact, I had said this earlier. A friend of ours, that Woody and I had talked to about a pattern that we were seeing, and I wanted to ask him about this. I said, why Sephora gift cards? What's the deal with the Sephora gift card? Why are we seeing so many of these Sephora gift cards? Anybody know? Anybody heard about this at all? Or Google Play or Xbox cards, the gift cards? All over the dark web. Anybody know what they're used for other than perfume and video games? You can purchase Bitcoin with them. You can go online to a couple of these sites. You can take a Sephora perfume card and buy Bitcoin. So if you really want to think about how intricate money laundering can be, so I'll take my $2,000 in SNAP benefits. I'll sell them over here for $1,000, take my $1,000, go into Walmart, buy $1,000 of Sephora gift cards, go online and buy Bitcoin. Try getting that money back. So, and again, I am not a technology person, and let me repeat that, okay? Not a technology person. If I can figure this out, I can't imagine what you people in your companies can figure out. And I'll close on that, and it goes, and again, it comes back to what I'm saying. Think like a criminal, and if you're unable to do that, sit down with people who work with criminals every day. But develop these partnerships with law enforcement, develop these and not even so much law enforcement, but just, a lot of state agencies, a lot of, insurance companies, they have a lot of investigators that maybe aren't law enforcement today, but used to be. They're still well versed in this. But until we really start working together on this, we're going to continue to chase our tails. But thanks for having me.
Appointed by Governor Glenn Youngkin this past January, Carrie Roth heads the Virginia Employment Commission, the Virginia government agency charged with maintaining a stable workforce for Virginia's large, diverse economy and for ensuring opportunities for Virginia workers. Importantly, the VEC also administers the Commonwealth's Unemployment Compensation Program, which provides temporary financial assistance to those who have lost jobs as they seek new employment opportunities. Ms. Roth brings to her position extensive government and private sector experience, having served as a senior executive to Republican Governors George Allen and Bob McDonnell, and as an appointee of Democrat Governor Ralph Northam to the Virginia Workforce Development Board. She is a successful entrepreneur and passionate advocate for emerging medical and bioscience technologies. The Government Business Executive Forum is pleased to welcome an experienced and respected leader in Virginia government, an accomplished business professional and entrepreneur, and Virginia's Commissioner of the Virginia Employment Commission, Carrie Roth.
Thanks, Barry. Yeah. My goodness, that is like the best introduction I've ever had in my entire career. So I'm retiring. I think that's a great way to go out, and I really appreciate you all inviting me up today. And Mark, just listening to you, and it's just really, before I came up here, we were actually having a meeting on fraud detection. And we have a lot of folks and partners that we have, LexisNexis being one of those, and many others that are helping us on that detection side, but that prevention side is really where we need to go. And so, as was mentioned into the introduction, I was appointed by the governor to serve as the commissioner of the Virginia Employment Commission. And Don was asking me, well, why did I take that job? Well, I like big problems, and I've spent my last 8 years working with emerging technology companies and helping them go from very early stage to help them get to become on their way to scaling up. And so applying those same type of principles to a very big government problem and an agency that really needs to be rebuilt and adapt to the economy of today and to the fraud of today. The agency of 2.5 years ago is not the agency of today or tomorrow, and it's not just the Virginia Employment Commission. That includes employment commissions across the country, and all of those are faced on it. So when I took over this position in January, we had 3 primary goals, and that is really to have a UI system that is responsive, efficient, and customer focused. And our objectives were to eliminate the backlogs, become the best in class, the best employment commission in the country, and then create an agency that's resilient and responsive to the changing economy. We all know, if you just look at history, there is at least every 10 years, you're going to have some type of economic event. And so, as Mark was talking about, like looking forward, how do we prepare for that next event. So when I took over in January, what was the state of the Virginia Employment Commission? We had significant numbers of backlogs, and I'll show you those in a little bit. We had a technology, a new system that came online a year ago. It was 14 years in the making. It started when I was Deputy Secretary of Commerce and Trade for Governor McDonnell. The tax portion of that UI mod system went live when I was during that term. And then when I came into this new position, 2 governors in between, and a whole different career that I had, and come back and we had just gone live with that system. You can see the amount of work that we had, and really, once it went live, immediately there was a cyber attack on that system. And so the main thing and the main drivers we need to do is we need our customers, and our goal is to have 99% of our customers using our online customer self-service portal. And our way to get there is how do we prevent and detect fraud so that real Virginians, folks that are unemployed, can get into the system. We also had a team that was new. 90% of our adjudicators, which are our team that when there's a dispute between the employer and the employee of why they're no longer employed, they're hearing officers, so they have to investigate the difference between those opinions, were hired during the pandemic and really just said, okay, go for it. The agency was at a 50-year low in funding. At the same time, had an unprecedented attack or caseload that hadn't been seen before. And so the staff was really weary. They'd been worn down and overwhelmed by the number of works that had been going on. And if you just want to look at that impact, if you go back to 2014 and then you go in 2019, 135,000 initial claims. 2020 to almost over 1.37 million claims, and about 400,000 of those came in the first week in April of 2020. So you can see, mind you, we're on an old system at this time in 2020 when these claims. And last week we have returned to pre-pandemic levels for initial claims. Last week ending, we saw 925 initial claims. But we've had, during that time frame, over 20 million payments went out the door, $14.7 billion in benefits. Now, how many of you all know how many working Virginians there are? Does anybody have any idea? 4.3. That's our workforce. $14.7 billion out the door. $12 billion of that was from the special federal programs, which ended well over a year ago. But what does that attract, Mark, looking forward? That attracts fraud like the agency, not only just in Virginia, but across the country had never seen before. Because typically, in Virginia anyway, unemployment is 26 weeks. It's less than $400 a week. You get a full benefit. It's not very attractive to fraudsters when you've got just 925 initial claims a week. That's not a lot of money. But when you could get $70,000 to $90,000 for unemployment with the special programs, plus rental assistance, all the other programs that were going on, it became highly attractive for the fraud to take place. And looking at our backlog of what we had over 700,000 work items that were facing us in January of last year. Over 258,000 of those were potential fraud claims that we had to work through. Since that time, our current balance with that is 133,000 work items. You can see the vast majority of that are first level appeals. So every decision that we make as you work through the backlog, people are not happy with that decision, they can appeal that. That represents about 55,000 Virginians that have cases and appeals. The rest of that workload we pretty much have worked through and are current with our claims as we work through that potential fraud backlog. Our separation reports, why are these separation reports really important? We had over 246,000 separation reports that were waiting to be completed. The value of those separation reports is the employer telling us that this person was employed, 2, that they really were separated, or 3, actually, they're still working for us. They're still working for us. Somebody got their identity, and they now have those benefits. So it's really important that we work through those separation reports, and it was our quick focus, and we completed those on March 2nd. And since then, they've come in. So any of you all business folks, if you own your own business or talk to your AHR folks, we really need those separation reports, and we really need to help prevent fraud. Our adjudication claims, we had a backlog of over 112,000 of those. We eliminated our January unpaid backlogs, and really the backlogs or the work that we have right now are current, but also as we continue to work through those potential fraud, then that goes into this bucket to be identified for people who are truly real claimants. And then as I mentioned before, our first level appeals, you can see our work went down and where we go up. And all along the way, we've got a dedicated transformation team. So we work with the Chief Transformation Officer, Eric Miller, who's the first Chief Transformation Officer for the Commonwealth of Virginia. And our entire team, we talk about daily segments of what we're focusing on. We have initiatives. We test, try, we fail. If they work, we scale them up. If they don't, we abandon them. So we very much are leading with business-led principles to really work through these. And then we're now transforming to best in class. Sure, technology is all a part of this, right? With simplification, how we bring in some bots and all of that work. But you've got to start with the human capital first. And how do we simplify these processes? And then use technology to empower that along the way. Overpayment waivers. So typically Virginia is not a waiver state. Overpayment is a nice way to say that you received more benefits than you actually earned, and we now have more information. That means you now need to pay that money back. Because of the overwhelming of the system, the General Assembly in 2021 approved a special one-time waiver. There are some means testing for this. Through no fault of the own of the claimant, we have waived over $209 million. The vast majority of those are the federal dollars that have been paid out. We also could not collect until July of this year. So folks that had overpayments during that time frame that the General Assembly had a special collection freeze. And we started back in July, and just in these categories, we've recovered $7 million, but the first bill didn't really go out into August. Then you have to have 3 bills before you actually really start collecting from somebody. And also, and we work out payment plans with folks, and we still have people that are paying back from the last recession. But you can see that overpayment for the non-fraud is over $1 billion, and then our overpayment fraud is over $65 million. And I talked about the potential fraud claims, right? There's many things that will trigger what might be potentially fraud, and we don't talk about those things in public because, as Mark says, you're always trying to stay ahead, and you're really just trying to stay ahead until they figure out, and you try to move ahead, and then they figure it out. And so it's really this cat and mouse game that it's out there. But we had over $1.5 billion in potential fraud claims that we started investigating. And we really have done some very high-tech and low-tech ways of how we went through this fraud. We sent all to electronic verification. We had phone calls made. Our workforce team, we had people coming in that needed to come in and show their identity. At the same time, we use tools such as ID.me and other electronic verifications to do this. But, we also are required to make 2 touches. So we've got to do the best job, and we went above and beyond to make sure that we could target out of here true Virginians out of this work. And most of it now this is a whole new changing world for employment commissions across the country. Prior to the pandemic, typical fraud, you knew who was creating that fraud. You could identify the person, you can prosecute them, you can take them to jail. Now, with so many things being sold on the dark web, all of our information is so widely available for people to be able to use and to be able to sell. If you can think about public sector employees, how easy is it for people to find out our information? We've got to file conflict of interest statements. You've got publications that put out information. It's very easy to find even in just public employees. But we had over 230,000 claims that we know are created by identity theft. That's $1.5 billion. Administrative fraud, over 60 million, so that's just 19,728 claims, and then 2,000 claims for criminal fraud. And some of that we've already worked through, so this is what's outstanding to continue to work and investigate. But we created a whole new position, a Chief of Integrity and Compliance, and brought in a whole team of investigators, a team of investigators that we didn't have before. We do have some of those that have had some law enforcement experience or military experience. And it's really, that's where it's all shifting, and where most of our work that's very different than we saw before, and that's because of that huge amount of money. If you think about Virginia, there are some other states that you can read about in the paper that have over $40 billion of fraud that are out there, and so we have recovered $292 million of that. We have been working very closely with the federal government as well as the state attorney general's office to convict and prosecute these folks. We've had 76 cases in Virginia where we've received convictions. That doesn't include people who created fraud and were convicted in other states. There's a lot of multi-state action through this, and we find that through all of our data integrity information and hubs that we share across the United States that we can bounce information off as one of the many different tools of how we try to really truly identify these folks. Over $2 million in restitution ordered. And the highest sentence has been 103 months. And Mark talked about the relationship between the agencies and law enforcement, and we spend a lot of time with the Attorney General's office to making sure that the data that we were pulling together for them, that we could put that in a way that was meaningful for them to be able to quickly prosecute those cases versus just here's a whole bunch of data and you can just sift through it, and so we really have to work well together. So we have 2 folks that are in the Attorney General's office in Virginia that we are that their work is solely to help support our work, but really the U.S. DOL Office of Inspector General has been a huge partner in a lot of this work, and with the local Commonwealth attorneys, this is not something that they have the time, energy, and resources by and large, so it's really important that we work with our state and federal partners on this. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you all might have. No questions? Okay. Well, thank you all very much. Really appreciate it.
Carrie, please accept this as a token of our appreciation for you being here, and you will be staying for the reception if there aren't any questions that you all have. And Mark, here is your coin. Thank you, sir. It's under the $20 gift rule, so you should be good. All right.
Advanced analytics, computing, communications, artificial intelligence, and innovation all come together at LNSSI, LexisNexis Special Services, a company that exists to provide government agencies at all levels cutting-edge solutions to fight fraud and reduce waste and abuse. Haywood Woody Talcove leads LNSSI. His background in the application of advanced technologies to vital government missions spans more than 3 decades. A visionary leader in the power of data to improve mission performance, Mr. Talcove applies his experience and expertise beyond the boundaries of his position and serves on many boards, but none more important than his more than 10-year tenure as a board member of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. An industry leader whose career embodies the GBEF vision to be part of something bigger. Please welcome for today's Focus on Technology, LNSSI CEO, Haywood Woody Talcove.
I appreciate that, yeah. All right. Is there a clicker? All right, there we go. All right, so I guess I'm standing between a reception and cocktails, and I have to go home and fix a broken microwave. So I don't know how long this is going to go. It just depends. But I really want to thank Mark and Carrie for their presentations. Mine's a little bit different in that this is probably more of a counseling session of my frustration. I've been CEO for 14 years, and one of the things that I know is that pay and chase just doesn't work. And it's so frustrating and maddening to see whether it's 900 cases of Red Bull. And by the way, how do you get an EBT card to get you 900 cases?
Use 25 to 30 cards at a time.
At a time. That's probably a very common thing that an EBT recipient gets. Or, I mean, you taking over and seeing a backlog like that, it's frustrating. So, I can see what I didn't know. So I've got this presentation. There's no press in here? All right. I appreciate you letting me do this little counseling session for myself. And please don't talk to anybody about those emails that I shared. And I appreciate it.
Thank you, Woody. There you go, sir. Association.
But I'm not in the private sector. I can get more than a $20.
You can get more. you can get the gold-plated version. Yeah, that was really good. It really startling, some of these statistics and really what we're facing, and that really, I think, enlightened a lot of that. I know we're about 2 minutes to go here, but we have one more important part of the program, and I wanted to recognize a special individual we have in the audience. Mike, would you come up and introduce our guest that we have tonight in the audience and have him come up?
Sure, thank you. So I invited one of Carasoft's most entrusted small business partners this evening, and so I'll tell you a little bit about them. They're 1109, a veteran-owned, service-disabled small business, a recent winner of the T4NG contract. Many of you know that contract out there. Both the co-founders are here tonight. They're sitting at the table with me. Lewis is a former Army guy, a tanker. Probably all I need to say about that. You know, you ride around the battlefield in air conditioning and things. But but you may have seen Lewis recently because he is a awardee for the Federal Health IT 100, recently awarded. So congratulations to you on that. And then sitting to his right is Kyle. And Kyle and I have known each other a couple of years. He's an incredible businessman, but back in November 2007, he was running around in Afghanistan getting shot at. And as a result of his actions under fire in combat, he was recognized with the Medal of Honor. So he's one of our living Medal of Honor recipients. So thank you very much for your service. And that's about it for me, but I can say or describe Kyle in one word, and you'll have the opportunity to talk to him and Lewis this evening at the social. But one word explains that man. This man, humble. Thank you.
Yeah, that was great. All right. Okay, we're going to wrap it up. This was our last monthly program series event, and I think it's been a really successful year, and it's successful because of the people like yourselves that come out and support this. So thank you. We do have one remaining EDGE AM event, and that's going to be on December 13th, and the registration link will be going out, I think, in the next 2 days. Correct, Mary Shea? So that'll be our last actual EDGE program event. But when we reflect back, it's really been a successful year. We started out with the EDGE at CES in January of this year. Then we had the EDGE Security Summit, which we had not done before, which was a major success. And then we've had these monthly program series events. So thank you all for coming out. The reception is next door, and we look forward to seeing everyone in Vegas in January. Have a nice holiday.